I moved into an old Victorian-style house a few months ago, thinking I'd finally found the perfect place. It was cheap, spacious, and came with an eerie charm I thought would inspire me as a writer. The landlord seemed too eager to rent it out, but I chalked it up to luck. On my first day, as I unpacked, I noticed a door tucked away in the far corner of the basement. It was different from the rest, heavy, wooden, and locked with an iron padlock that looked ancient. I assumed it was storage or some unused part of the house, so I didn't think much of it. That night, I heard faint whispers. At first, I thought it was the wind or maybe my imagination, but as the nights went on, they became clearer. The whispers were coming from the basement. Curiosity got the best of me, and one evening, I decided to investigate. The door was ice cold to the touch. I pressed my ear against it and heard soft murmurs, like a distant conversation. I tried to open it, but the padlock wouldn't budge. That's when I noticed something odd. Scratch marks on the wood, as if someone had desperately tried to claw their way out. I couldn't shake the unease. Each night, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to form words now, though I couldn't quite make them out. One night, after a particularly vivid dream about the door creaking open and something crawling out, I decided to take action. I bought a bolt cutter the next day. As I stood in front of the door, my hands trembled. With one swift motion, the padlock snapped. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow, pitch-black staircase leading downward. A foul, musty odor wafted up, making my stomach churn. Clutching a flashlight, I descended cautiously. The stairs seemed endless, and the deeper I went, the colder it became. My breath fogged in front of me, and the whispers grew deafening, almost like a chant. At the bottom, I found myself in a small, circular room with walls covered in strange symbols etched into the stone. In the center of the room was an old wooden chair. Shackles dangled from its arms and legs, and the floor was stained dark, as though it had absorbed years of spilled ink, or something worse. Then I saw it, a shadow flickering in the corner, just out of the beam of my flashlight. It didn't move like a person. It swayed unnaturally as though caught in a loop. My heart pounded as I called out, "Who's there?" The shadow stopped swaying. Slowly, it turned, revealing empty, hollow eyes staring straight through me. I stumbled back, nearly losing my footing on the uneven ground. The shadow stepped closer, its hollow eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. It whispered something, the sound like dry leaves scraping across stone.
Help me.
The voice croaked, though it didn't sound human. "Who are you? What is this place?" I stammered, my voice echoing in the chamber. The shadow tilted its head, its form flickering like static on an old TV. Suddenly the symbols on the walls began to glow, pulsing with a sickly green light. The air grew colder, so frigid it felt like needles piercing my skin. The whispers in the room intensified, now a cacophony of voices overlapping, each one desperate, pleading, angry. I tried to retreat up the stairs, but the moment I turned, the shadow lunged. It didn't touch me physically, instead, it passed through me. A bone-chilling cold gripped my body, and in that moment I wasn't in the room anymore. I was standing in a dimly lit house. The same wooden chair from the chamber was in the center of a small, decrepit living room. A woman sat in the chair, her face contorted in terror, her arms shackled. A man stood over her, his face obscured by shadow, holding a strange glowing dagger. He whispered something in a language I couldn't understand, and as he raised the blade, the woman screamed, a scream so raw and anguished that it shattered the eerie silence. I blinked, and I was back in the chamber. The shadow stood in front of me again, but now it had form. A pale, emaciated figure with deep scars crisscrossing its body. It pointed to the chair, and at that moment, I understood. Something unspeakable had happened here, and the shadow wanted me to witness it all. The shadow didn't wait for me to process its silent demand. A guttural noise escaped its mouth, or what I assumed was its mouth, as it moved closer to the chair, gesturing wildly. Its scarred hand left faint trails of black smoke in the air, and suddenly the room began to change. The chamber was no longer empty. The chair now had shackles hanging from its arms and legs, glinting ominously in the dim green glow. The symbols on the walls pulsed in time with an otherworldly heartbeat that I could feel in my chest. The temperature dropped further, frost forming on the edges of the walls. And then I wasn't alone. Faint figures began to materialize around the edges of the room. Men, women, and children, their forms translucent, their faces hollow and void of emotion. They all stared at the chair, as if waiting for something. No, someone. One of the figures stepped forward, its head tilting unnaturally as it studied me.
"You shouldn't be here,"
it said, its voice layered with echoes. The words seemed to vibrate through my skull. The shadow figure moved between us almost protectively. It turned back to me and once again pointed to the chair. Reluctantly, I stepped closer, my legs trembling with every step. As I neared the chair, whispers filled my ears, overlapping so much I couldn't make out words, only emotions, rage, despair, and fear. "Sit!" the shadow hissed, its voice like the scraping of metal. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my body wouldn't obey. My legs moved on their own, and before I knew it, I was lowering myself into the cold, unyielding chair. The moment I sat, the shackles snapped shut around my wrists and ankles, locking me in place. The room spun violently, and the translucent figures pressed closer, their faces now twisted into grotesque masks of anger. One by one, they began to chant in that strange, guttural language I had heard before. The chair vibrated beneath me, and I felt a searing pain shoot through my body. It wasn't just pain, it was memories, not mine, but theirs. I was living through their final moments: betrayal, torture, murder. Each memory hit me like a wave, leaving me gasping for air, my mind reeling from the horrors. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the chanting. The chanting reached a deafening crescendo, and the figures closed in, their hands stretching toward me. My mind teetered on the brink of collapse, overloaded with their anguish and torment. Suddenly, the shadow slammed its hand against the armrest of the chair, and the room fell silent. The figures froze, their faces now blank and lifeless. The shadow turned to me, its presence towering, and for the first time, it spoke clearly. "You chose to open the door," it said, its voice resonating with a mixture of anger and pity. "Now you must become its keeper." Before I could protest, the symbols on the walls flared with blinding light. Pain exploded through my body and everything went dark. When I woke up, I was no longer in the room. I was back at the foot of the staircase in my house. The door to the basement was gone. Everything seemed normal until I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes glowed faintly green, and my shadow moved on its own, flickering unnaturally. The whispers began that night, faint but persistent. They came from behind me, from within my shadow. They spoke of pain, betrayal, and vengeance, urging me to open another door somewhere else. I realized I wasn't free. I was part of the cycle now. The house was no longer mine. I was just its latest caretaker.